Please pray with me for a moment. Dear God, take our minds and think through them. Take our hands and work through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire. Amen. Well, it's wonderful to be with you this afternoon. When I was here way back in the late 90s, there was no 5 o'clock service. And it's obviously a great idea. So I will welcome you, but also welcome myself to the 5 o'clock Eucharist. Let me just ask you, how many of you were here? I know a few of you probably were when I was here all those years ago. Not many. Good. That's actually good. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself, so you'll know who this is that's preaching. I came here after I had had a really painful experience in another parish where I had been for almost 14 years when my partner, then partner, now husband, and I became a couple, and that was not acceptable. So we left, we left, and then I did some other work, non-parish work, and then I was called by St. Mark's. I received a call asking if I would meet with the search committee for an interim at St. Mark's. And I thought, I have no interest whatsoever in going to St. Mark's. That's the truth. And that was because I knew Jim Adams, the former and late rector, very well. And all my knowledge of St. Mark's just made me think it was going to be a very trendy, but probably shallow place. That's what I expected. But I said, but I'll meet with anybody. So I met with the search committee and immediately connected and had a sense that this was where I was supposed to be. And I came here, and it was a marvelous 2 years, and for me, a real time of redemption. I said to St. Mark's when I left and did my liturgy of departure, I can't tell you how much I appreciate all that you've done for me and for Tom. We were welcomed very much here as a couple. You have really given me back my ministry. And I went on from there having no expectation before I came here that I would be back in parish ministry permanently. I then went to a parish in Chicago near the University of Chicago where Chris went to school and had a marvelous time there. So it really was, for me, kind of a magical time being at St. Mark's. I said this morning that I had not preached here for 24 years. Actually, that wasn't quite true. I'll tell you another just little vignette. The late, great, much revered Verna Dozier, who has a window, where is her window? Way up there, here, was a member of St. Mark's at that time. And she and I had gotten off years before to a very bad start. In fact, it wasn't my fault. I can honestly say that. Many things probably are and have been, but this was not. But she blamed me for something that someone else had done. So we had this awful relationship. And when she heard that the search committee was talking to me at St. Mark's, she went to the search committee and said, "You're about to make a terrible mistake." Well, be that as it may be, or was, I came, and Verna and I kind of fell into each other's arms. And Verna being Verna, I mean, we became very close. And I was going to tell you, the other time I came back to preach was at her funeral. Michael Curry, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, and I both preached at Verna's funeral here at St. Mark's. So I was back once. And I will tell you one more little thing, and then I'm going to go on with my sermon. So Verna and I, as I said, became very close. And after I left St. Mark's, I would come back here just to see Verna, not for any other reason. And I wouldn't come to church because it's a bad idea to keep coming back to church. But I went and I would come and visit Verna. And when she realized that our relationship had changed so dramatically, she said to me, "You must have undergone an enormous transformation." I just love that. And it was so Verna. I didn't argue. I have to admit, I feel just a little bit of pressure preaching this afternoon, as I did this morning, because people kept saying to me before this morning, the guest preachers who have been with us during the rector sabbatical have just been marvelous, every one of them. And we trust that you're not going to disappoint us. Well, I hope that I'm not going to disappoint you. I do have to say that I could have been given less challenging readings than today's passages from Ecclesiastes and Luke. The Ecclesiastes reading is attributed to King Solomon. That's because they thought that would make it seem wise. But actually, it was written centuries after the death of Solomon. The writer of Ecclesiastes summed up his thoughts, really his thoughts about the whole matter, in the first line of the reading. "Vanity of vanities," says the teacher, "vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And as you heard, he goes on from there to bemoan the fact that you have to leave behind to others, whether they're worthy or not, all that you have toiled to earn. Now, it would be difficult, it seems to me, difficult to do a better job of condensing a completely negative and pessimistic view of life into a few brief sentences than the author of Ecclesiastes manages to do here. This reading also provides a kind of intriguing counterpoint to what Jesus has to say in the gospel reading from Luke. I find it fascinating that Luke observes the same reality as the author of Ecclesiastes, namely that you can't take it with you. But for the Jesus of Luke, you're only a fool if you act as if you're going to live forever. Whereas Ecclesiastes views living as an unhappy business, period, because you can't take it with you. The Jesus of Luke believes it's only unhappy if you forget that your life is finite. So viewing life as being no more than what you possess is indeed a dead end, says Jesus. And the secret of life, of what John calls abundant life, is remembering that we are mortal and ultimately dependent upon God, who is generous, generous beyond our wildest imagination. I truly believe this, and yet I know it personally, how seductive is the need to feed my ego. I'm going to venture our egos with all kinds of success, including money and possessions. The two poles of the tension between Luke and Ecclesiastes, or between what Richard Rohr describes as first half of life issues and second half of life issues, or you could say between nourishing the ego and nourishing the soul, are beautifully portrayed in a movie I've loved since the first time I saw it in the late 1990s. I'm referring to a movie called Babette's Feast. How many of you have seen Babette's Feast? Well, a few of you, just a few. That's great. Okay, well, that's probably better since I'm going to tell you about it. Ironically, in this movie, It's the pious Christians in the story who portray a life of clinging to what has been, while the completely worldly character, I'm going to say, Babette, shows a deep understanding of what it means to be free. I think of Babette's feast as a kind of long parable. It's a story about two pious sisters, Martina and Philippa, who live in a tiny Danish coastal village way up in Jutland, where everything feels gray, and where their late father had been the pastor of an extremely dour Christian sect for many years. It's instructive that the only ornamentation in their church is a huge crucifix against the front wall. The two sisters never married. They never married because marriage would have interfered with their ability to serve their father's needs. And after his death, they devote themselves single-mindedly to carrying on the ministry that he had with an ever-shrinking congregation that meets no longer in the church, but in the home of the two sisters. Their religion I will call Protestant pietism of the gravest variety. Words that come to mind are joyless, rigorous, and earnest. They sing a couple of hymns by heart when they gather, with eyes turned heavenward, singing of the heavenly Jerusalem in a way that would discourage us from even wanting to visit the place. There isn't a hint of the Eucharist in their constricted rites. But of course, these dour Christians did eat of necessity, and their daily meals matched their piety. A piece of dried fish, a bowl of some dreadful-looking porridge, brown it was, made of bread boiled in water, with a bit of ale and a chunk of rye bread. Martina and Philippa share their small cottage with a live-in servant named Babette, a French woman who lost her entire family to warfare in France and came to their village as a way of escaping. She was desperate to find lodging, so she begged the two sisters to allow her to become their servant without receiving any pay, but only a place to live. Well, reluctantly, they agreed, and they gave Babette lodging in a tiny garret reached through an outside staircase. Being a foreigner and being French, the people in the village don't know what to make of Babette. As you can imagine, her French ways just don't fit in. She seems exotic and dangerous. People show her necessary courtesy, but they always keep her safely at arm's length. They are curious, yet suspicious. They never invite her to join in their worship, though she always prepares tea for their little gatherings. Babette's one extravagance is to purchase lottery tickets. And one day, she receives the shocking news that she has won the lottery. She has struck it rich. As a result, Babette wants to throw a huge dinner party on what would have been the old pastor's 100th birthday. Babette, who we later learn had been a great chef in Paris, promises the people a real French feast. She only insists that everyone in the tiny community be present at the table for the meal. Well, as you might imagine, the sisters are very reluctant to allow this to happen. Such an extravagant meal surely would not be an appropriate way to honor the memory of their pious father. But eventually, they do give in. After all, it will make Babette so happy. Well, for weeks, Babette labors. Oh, how she labors. She sends to France for fine wines, black truffles, quail. She even has a live turtle for the soup shipped in by boat. She tirelessly shops and cooks and bakes in preparation for the dinner. But guess what? All the while, the townspeople are in turmoil over this impending feast. Some are even having strange satanic nightmares, imagining that Babette is in league with the devil. They hold secret meetings late at night to consider the best course of action. Ultimately, they decide that just so long as they don't enjoy themselves, it would be wrong not to attend Babette's feast, considering all the trouble she is going to. Why, they say to one another, it will be as if we weren't even eating or drinking. It will be as if we didn't even have tongues with which to taste the food. They will so completely fill their minds with thoughts of their departed pastor that they can avoid paying any attention at all to what they are eating. After all, to enjoy such opulence would indeed dishonor the pastor's memory. The day of the feast finally arrives, and the congregation gathers grimly around the table, beautifully set with white napery, fine china, and crystal. They start out by singing a few somber hymns to get into the proper mood. Once the meal begins, course after course appears from the kitchen. There is real turtle soup. There is caviar, quail with truffles in pastry. A salad of rare and exotic greens is served, and fresh fruits and cheeses, of course, from France. Every course is accompanied by the best of wines, perfectly matched to the food. It is a 5-star, 7-course French dinner. The only one at the table who is free enough to enjoy the meal is a military officer, like Babette, a foreigner, who had long ago hoped to marry one of the sisters. With every sip of wine and every tasty bite of food, eloquent prose flows from his lips. He cannot praise the food and drink highly enough. But the townspeople respond by quoting their favorite sayings of the departed pastor as they struggle not to think about what they're eating and drinking. Yet, grace can only be resisted for so long, and in the end, Babette's feast has its way even with these old pietists. A mischievous gleam begins to appear in their eyes as they raise their glasses of wine for a toast. They begin to tease each other gently, and they pretend not to notice that they are enjoying this meal much more than they are supposed to. By the end of the feast, no one could fail to be aware of its transforming effect. And finally, after sipping a little cognac, the guests go back to their homes happier, freer, and warmer toward each other and even toward Babette. Now that the occasion is over, and I love this part, Martina and Philippa expect that Babette will take her lottery winnings and return home to France. They've been sure all along that this meal was just a prelude to her departure. But they are wrong. Babette isn't going anywhere. She has knowingly spent every penny of her winnings to provide them with a feast. She has given all that she has on the feast, prepared for people whose lives are so governed by a sense of scarcity and of their own unworthiness that they are determined to resist her generosity. Aren't we fortunate? Aren't we fortunate that, like Babette, Jesus gave for us all that he had, all that he was, in order that we might feast and discover the transforming power of God's love? And isn't it a blessing that regardless of our disposition, he invites us to his feast not just once, but as often as we will come and be fed. So let the feast continue. Amen.